Before we begin, just to let you guys know, our artwork was designed by Nickel Anarchy and music by Scott Holmes from Free Music Archive. Warning, this podcast does contain spoilers for the Riordan Verse series. Hello everyone and welcome back to the Best Damn Camp podcast, a Riordan Verse read-along podcast that sets out to read all the books by Rick Riordan in timeline order. I'm your host Fran and welcome back to the show. Before I start though, I feel you may realise that there is something changed about my intro and the starting bit before the music. And that's the fact that I now know how to actually pronounce Uncle Rick's last name, because dyslexia is evil. And for about, how old am I? Hold on, I'll do maths, one sec. 19, 18, 20, 21, 22, 23. Okay, for 7 years I've been pronouncing Rick Riordan as Rick Riordan with an extra I. I don't know where that extra I came from or how I managed to give him an extra I. So I would like to thank the Tumblr Anon who incredibly politely, and I am eternally grateful for it, for pointing out the fact that I was spelling Rick's last name wrong and pronouncing it wrong, which I am very embarrassed about, and it's there in my last 2 episodes, you guys know, but I will be improving it, and hopefully I won't slip back into old habits. But if I do, please let me know, but be kind, because I am incredibly sensitive and I will cry. But let's carry on. So yes, thank you to the person who let me know I was pronouncing Uncle Rick's last name wrong. True blasphemy on my part. Don't worry, I've atoned for my sins with well, I haven't atoned for them yet. I will atone for my sins. I've got okay, let's move on, because that's going to get super dark. Right, okay. So today we are continuing our Riordan Verse journey with the story of Luke Castellan, who goes on to play, shall we say, a very important role in the Percy Jackson series. I don't know what happened to my voice there, but we're going to move on. Now, having this story, which is part of the Demigod Files stories, particularly the actual very first one in that collection of stories, having that before The Lightning Thief, which we will be starting next week, I think is an interesting choice in terms of the timeline, as it kind of gives us more context to Luke as a character and kind of really helps us understand him a little bit more, especially considering what he goes on to be in the series as a whole. So with that said, what I'm looking at today is character as well as narrative. But before we properly begin, let's get our synopsis. Luke Castellan, the 14-year-old son of Hermes, who fled home at age 9, adventures into a dangerous situation with best friend Thalia Grace, daughter of Zeus, where they learn the true consequences of demigod life, and meet a being that changes their view of the world as they know it. Oh, and watch out for hammers, mate. Okay, so synopsis out the way. I've just got to say, the story of Luke, oof, like seriously, this story is intense and it hits hard. Like, Luke as a young demigod, so in the book he is about 14 years old in this story, but when we meet him in The Lightning Thief, I believe he's about 19, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong, please and thank you. And at this point, when we are meeting him, so he's still hardened by his life on the run. He's already been on the streets for about 5 years. and with more to go, as we learn in The Lightning Thief and the follow-up books also. Even with those 5 years and him being 49 and having someone with him like Thalia, we see his bitterness at the gods and his frustration, but he does still have love in his heart. Very much so for Thalia Grace also, which is a ship that I shan't be getting too much into because I don't want to start shipping wars here, but it's one that I wasn't actually expecting. I know it's out there, I've just never been too aware of it, as like in the actual book series itself, we don't actually see any interaction between Thalia and Luke. So to see this possibility of kind of what could have been in this mini story it's pretty cool. But to see him so young, confused, and caring in such a way about the people around him is really fascinating, as in terms of the timeline that we're going through. Obviously we started with Greek gods and Greek heroes. This is our first experience of a modern demigod. But the struggles they face in this story, and from what we hear of their journeys, we begin to empathise with both Luke and Thalia, and empathise with their struggles, and in terms of where Luke goes in the series as a whole, we kind of wonder what could have been if things were different for him, and what future did our seer Hal that we meet in the story see for him that leads to a crossroads, and what was those crossroads. Now let's get into the main story, and of course I do mention this at the start, but there will be spoilers for the whole Percy Jackson universe and a little bit of Heroes of Olympus in this discussion predominantly, especially with this being about Luke Castellan, who plays a really important role in Percy Jackson. But also because we have Thalia Grace in this story, there's an important aspect for her also that relates to Heroes of Olympus, but I'll get onto that when I get into the main narrative of the story. But what I want to start with first actually is the story-ish that we get before Luke Castellan, which is entitled Letter to the Demigods, and this is from our senior scribe of Camp Half-Blood, Uncle Rick himself, who has been asked by campers who are there now, and this is set after Heroes of Olympus, but obviously the story is before everything with Percy Jackson, etc. He's been being asked by campers, and just campers in general are asking about Luke Castellan and what happened, who he was, but Annabeth and Thalia don't want to tell that story because it's something that's personal to them, and it still hurts even now that this person that they loved and grew up with changed and, unfortunately also dies in the end. But Rick decides that he thinks it's important that people know where Luke came from and what led to him becoming who he is and what he is known for. And so we begin with Luke's story just because everyone wishes to know about him, and it is time to share his story, as it's sort of almost a cautionary tale now, and we get an idea as to what went wrong for, as Rick calls him, such a promising demigod. And then we go on to the story, and it is the story of Luke before Camp Half-Blood, and seemingly before meeting Annabeth also, although we start with sort of him at the end and him retelling the story of their day in a diary that he's been given by the old man, who originally I do assume may have been Hermes, just because the word old man, or my old man or the old man, is usually used as sort of like is it a term of endearment? I guess it kind of is, but it's like a term of endearment for a father or a grandfather. So hence my assuming that it may have been Hermes that gave Luke this diary. But as we find out later on, it wasn't Hermes, it was someone else. But I'll get onto that when we get to that point. Now, he begins to tell the story about him and Thalia's journey, definitely just before they met Annabeth, just because Annabeth isn't with them. We learn, oh my god, so I mentioned this in the synopsis, but I do need to bring this up. He ran away when he was 9 years old. Like, I had no idea he was that young, like, at all. I don't know why, because I feel like it was brought up in the books at some point, but for some reason I just kind of forgot, which makes sense because I feel like it's been a while since I've read them, but maybe it isn't mentioned. We'll see when I get into the book itself, but like, he was 9. Like, that's just so young. And Thalia, I think, was possibly around the same age, but they've been travelling together for a good period of time now, having met when they were battling a dragon. Everyday demigod life. Now, where the story begins is with Zeus and Luke following this spirit goat. I don't really know what it is, but the goat is called Amalthea. We'll go with Amalthea, who is meant to be a messenger of Zeus, who's obviously Thalia's father. And they're following this goat because usually... no, it wasn't a goat, was it? It was like a ram or something. I don't know. My notes aren't as detailed as they should be, clearly. But they're following Amalthea because, as Thalia mentions to Luke, Amalthea was the being that led her to Luke, so she's good luck, which, gets him all flustered and kind of all blushy and all that sort of stuff, which, by the way, more hints of a romance with Thalia, which, interesting, because his literal words were he would do anything for her because of those eyes, and that is for a moment that happens later on, but like, clearly he would do anything for her. Now, what is also interesting, so they're discussing following Amalthea and kind of avoiding trying to make eye contact with mortals and so on and so forth. Luke actually mentions that he used to have mortal friends. Whenever he would end up in certain areas for a period of time, he would become friends with a local, and they would get on really well until he told them the truth, that he was a son of Hermes and that monsters were coming and he was always in danger. And they'd always just assume that it was some kind of game he was playing and would be like, man, I wish that I was a demigod or a son of Hermes or something like that, which it's kind of, oh no, the fandom are the mortals. We're the people that Luke, oh no. Yeah, we are 100% the mortals that Luke. Ooh, imagine if the demigods are real and Luke actually met people who knew about the books. I don't know what I'm talking about now. This doesn't make any sense. Sorry, I'll move on. So he gets upset that they don't understand, and then he leaves, and he does it a few times until eventually he decides to give up on mortals, which kind of makes sense considering what we know about his opinion of mortals later in the books. Like, he basically despises them, sees them as lesser than him, and it's why he then makes backbiters so he can kill both demigods, monsters, and mortals at the same time, which, that's messed up. And then she continues to talk about various different things, she being Thalia, of course, and it even mentions the story of Kronos, which, interesting that he knows the story. And then we learn a little bit more about Luke as a whole, and we just see his complete and utter resentment and bitterness towards Hermes, which isn't as strong as we know it in the Percy Jackson series, but it's like a blooming hatred, which, fair enough considering he's been on the run for 5 years by being a demigod. Currently, we don't know anything about his mother. We don't even know her name at this point, which is kind of sad that we don't really know anything about her other than Luke blames Hermes for what happened to his mother. Not that we know what happened to her yet, in this current story at least. But what is interesting is that when Amalthea direct Thalia and Luke to a house nearby for them to check out, we learned that actually, and this is something that I thought was really, really interesting because it has not been explored in the Percy Jackson series as a whole. Children of Hermes can occasionally have abilities. And in Luke's case, it's the ability to sense locking mechanisms and like booby traps and stuff like that. And like unlock locks by placing his hand and focusing on it to unlock like a door lock. Which is what they do on this creepy sort of house in Richmond. Because kids are stupid. No, I'm joking. Oh god, I just realised that a lot of people listening are going to be kids. I'm really sorry, guys. That was mean. I won't do that again. No, so they get inside this house, and instantly the door closes and locks, and Luke's powers no longer work. The drapes are evil-eating human being thingies. They basically you touch them, they turn to sludge, they pull you in, and they try to eat you, which slightly terrifying because now I'm a little bit nervous about curtains because who knows if monsters are actually real, my curtains could be evil. And considering they actually would have a lot of things to hate about me, I've broken them quite a few times because I'm a clumsy bugger. I don't even know how I've managed to break them. Like I've managed to break them 3 or 4 times. Like I can still see that like the plaster of where we've had to replaster the wall from where it got ripped out. I just managed to sit on them quite a lot. I haven't recently just because we made the smart decision of getting me shorter curtains because I was an idiot and continued to keep sitting on them. I think I have pulled the short ones down by accident just because I like slipped and just grabbed onto it automatically. So not technically my fault. I'm getting a bit off topic here. Okay, let's focus back. Let's focus back. Focused. Okay, so they are in the house. The drapes are evil. And then they see 2 ghastly, glubby red eyes. And as everyone knows, red equals evil. So, well, or green in terms of Disney. That doesn't really matter in this case. Or Disney hype. Stop, Fran. Oh my god. Okay, glowing red eyes. Hear a creepy voice, but hear someone yelling, "Come find me," and like giving them directions to where to go to escape these creatures that are chasing them. And then they stumble into this room, the door behind them locks, and they hear some scraping. And this is where they come across, I don't know how to say his name, Halcyon or Halcon. I may say Halcon, I think that's probably right. Halcon Green, who, as we learn later, is dressed in a snake skin suit given to him by his father, Apollo. The reason why it's a snakeskin suit is because of Python, the original oracle of Delphi. And Halcon, or Hal as he likes to be called, does have the power of prophecy, but he used it incorrectly. He gave someone knowledge to save their life, which he was punished for, because mortals should not be able to decide when they're going to die because they know the answer to it. Telling the future always has consequences. And this was not a story to tell. This was like the worst demigod for Luke to me, like ever, because hearing the story of him being punished by his father Apollo for saving someone's life just inflames Luke's anger and disgust at the gods, which totally fair because they went a little bit far, because this Hal guy has been locked up in this house, particularly his childhood home, for decades and decades. Like, he has no idea how long he's been in there now. It's been so long. He's grown old. He is trapped by these creatures called the Lucrota. I'm going to call them Lucrota, who are really creepy, horrific monsters that they like mimic the voices of their victims, sort of like Cyclopses, which is a bit of foreshadowing from what we learn in Sea of Monsters. And they're these like creepy sort of like wolf, horse, lion, dog kind of like creatures that have like horse bones for teeth and make this sort of crack, 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 or clack, clack, or something noise. when they kind of chitter. It sounds really creepy, even reading it. It's just like, ugh. And Hal is basically trapped in this place with these monsters who speak for him. His voice was taken from him, and the only way he can speak is using a psychic link to these creatures who speak with his voice. And it's just horrifying, and like, you feel so bad for this guy. All he wanted to do was save this girl who was gonna die in an accident, so he told her how to stop that from happening, and he was punished for it. Like, it's awful. But what's even worse is that the only way for Hal to kind of get any sense of like life in a way is he has to basically agree and kind of cooperate with the Lacrota, otherwise he'll starve without ever actually dying. So he's allowed demigod companions that are able to that actually fall into the trap. They're allowed to be with him for the day, and then they're eaten by the monsters in the evening. And the deal is that whatever they've left behind, so maybe like a chocolate bar or a sandwich in their bag, he gets to eat it. And that's the only way he gets some sustenance. And it's just horrific. And justifiably, Thalia and Luke are absolutely repulsed by what he does, in the fact that he's kind of resigned to this now, that he is sort of like a monster himself, which admittedly Luke says to him, which he really shouldn't have, because come on, Luke, that's a bit mean. Like, you can see, like, he's devastated. Like, Hal looks absolutely withdrawn and devastated and defeated. It's really quite sad. But then we learn what is guiding these demigods to the house, and it's a sense of a treasure there in this box that is unbreakable, except for Luke, a son of Hermes, with breakable skills. That doesn't sound right. With breaking in skills. There we go. And so he's able to kind of fix that situation of getting through these booby traps and locks to get to what turns out to be a silver bracelet. So not too big of a deal, apparently, yet. But as the story continues, we then see Luke get more frustrated and angry with Hal for his cowardice and for allowing the gods to basically walk all over him instead of fighting back. And he becomes really quite cruel, actually, in a moment. He regrets it almost instantly, because he knows it's not Hal's fault that he's given up hope. Like, what does he have to hope for? There's nothing he can literally do. But he's just telling it like it is, which, totally fair. But what we learn, however, is that the releasing of the treasure is apparently meant to be a sign that the person who has come to reclaim what is rightfully theirs is going to be the person who sets him free. And he has an idea as to what that being set free may mean. It can either be that he finally is set free of his curse, or that he finally dies. And at this point, both Luke and Thalia are telling him to fight back, telling him to work through this, to figure out what they can do to save everyone, and save himself, really. And eventually, Hal decides to be brave enough, and decides to look into the future to see if there's anything he can see that can help them figure out a way to escape. And so he reads Thalia's future. And this is what it says. You are destined to survive today. Someday soon you will sacrifice yourself to save your friends. I see things that are hard to describe. Years of solitude. You will stand tall and still. Alive, but sleeping. You will change once and then change again. Your path will be sad and lonely. But someday you will find your family again. I'm sorry, I don't control what I see, but I didn't mean your mother. And, okay, lot to unpack there, and oh my god, this is what I love about Rick. He ties everything together in a story. There are things here that are foreshadowing what happens in the future. And considering this book comes out after all of Heroes of Olympus and Percy Jackson, we're supposed to read that and be like, ah, yes, this is what it connects to. This is what that means. But in terms of the right order and verse timeline, seeing this, we kind of don't understand what it means, and we don't understand the connection. But we've got this foreshadowing here, this foreshadowing of what is to come. And when it does unfold and we hear these stories and we see each thing unfolding, we're just going to remember this story and remember this mini prophecy, mini vision that Hal has of Thalia's future. And remember, oh yes, he said she was going to change. She was going to stand tall but silent, sleeping. And then she's going to change again. And that is, I'm just going to say that, I'm not going to say specifically because I'm trying to not give too much away. I know it's meant to be slightly spoilery, but I don't want to do too much. All of that first bit of standing tall, changing and changing again, is just the Percy Jackson and the Olympians. They're seeing her family again, but not her mother. Ears for heroes of Olympus. And I'm not going to say specifically who, because some people will know, some people will not, and I can't wait to bring it up myself when we get to Heroes of Olympus. So we've got a long while, but we're going to get there, and I'm very excited for it. And then we get Luke's prophecy, Luke's vision of the future. Fire. I saw fire. Hard to be sure. Luke, I also saw a sacrifice in your future, a choice, but also a betrayal. His path is hard to see, but if he survives today, he will betray. And it cuts off there. And it's just, Uncle Rick, I just love it. I think these are the things that I love about narrative and storytelling and story choices. To have this at the point where it is in terms of the timeline, and have it reflect on the future, but even having it where it's originally meant to be, which is after Heroes of Olympus, and we get that sort of flashback and understanding of the future now, it's kind of even sadder in a way. We can see that Luke, in a way, was prophesized to fail and turn, and these things, it's kind of, this is what I find really interesting, and they talk about this, that knowing the future is not worth knowing. It sets things in stone. The moment he hears this prophecy, his future is determined. And it's a really sad thing to think about, but it's also just really fascinating as a whole. And what's really interesting is that after that prophecy is told, I'm calling it a prophecy, but it's not really a prophecy, it's more like a vision, really. But after it's told, and Thalia is furious at what's being said about Luke, but the relationship between Hal and Luke changes. There's something different. They kind of understand each other a little bit more. And they do manage to figure out an escape plan using Greek fire. And this was the most interesting foreshadowing part that I found, which is it's incredibly subtle, but it's something that I will talk about now with spoilers, but also talk about when we get to it in future as well. Now, Luke finds the recipe for creating Greek fire. And that sort of thing isn't hard to forget. So in terms of Luke and the Titan War and being the leader of the Titan War and having that knowledge as to how to create Greek fire, it makes sense why their numbers were so powerful and why they just as a whole were incredibly powerful force, because they had something that was incredibly destructive, that could basically win a fight with only just that one weapon. And that is the uncontrollable force of Greek fire, which in this case helped them defeat I've forgotten the creatures' names already. The Lucrota. It helps them defeat the Lucrota, but in a way that is devastating to both the house and to Hal. And this is where we see the relationship between Hal and Luke bond, because the diary that Luke is writing in is Hal's diary, and he gets Luke to promise him to write in it, and his words are, "You have an important future. your choices will change the world. You can learn from my mistakes. Continue the diary. It might help with your decisions. And he finishes, in a sense, with Apollo was right. Sometimes the future really is better left a mystery. And I just love that. That's basically the phrase I was trying to use earlier, but I forgot it because my brain is a sieve. But this relationship and this understanding of hopefully learning from Hal's mistakes, Luke will be able to pursue a better future. Like, Hal is basically trying to help Luke make the right decision. And the unfortunate thing, as we see later, is that it doesn't help in the way that I'm guessing Hal wanted it to. But then what's even more interesting is a gift alongside the diary that Hal gifts Luke. And that is the celestial bronze dagger that the girl whose life he saved gifted to him, saying it would protect whoever wielded it. And we'll get onto that a little bit later when it becomes more significant. Now, the sad part here is that Thalia and Luke are able to escape with the use of Greek fire, with their intelligence, using Greek fire and its destructiveness to their advantage. But it comes at a cost. Hal's life. But he is grateful for it. He's able to beat his curse. He's able to finally be at rest. And hopefully they can see that in a way. We don't really kind of have that explored that much in terms of how Thalia and Luke feel about Hal sacrificing himself. But I'm hoping they feel better about it as a whole. But as they escape and come across an alleyway and get as far away from Hal's house as possible, they come across a 7-year-old hammer-wielding blonde bombshell Annabeth, who basically nearly cracks in Luke's skull while wielding this incredible hammer. Like, for a 7-year-old, firstly, how can she lift a hammer? That's my big question here. Because, I had no upper body skill as a child. Like, hammers are heavy. She's 7. Like, damn. But also the fact that she tried to take off Luke's head with a hammer, I think, is probably the greatest entrance for a character ever. And then him and Thalia see the horror and fear with Annabeth, who's clearly experienced some true horror things at such a young age. Now, we don't actually know how old Annabeth was when she ran away from home. I don't think we ever find out, but it appears that she's been on the run from home for a while now. And she's 7 at this current point, so maybe it's possible that she ran away at 6, which is horrifying to think about, that a 6-year-old child out on her own, chased and tortured by monsters, finally finds solace with these other 2 demigod kids, Thalia and Luke, who take her in and promise to protect her, promise to be her family. And she accepts it. She melts into them because this is the first time she's had peace in a long time. And they take her back to their camp, and then the story begins to come to an end, with Luke on first watch at the camp while Thalia and Annabeth rest. Oh, wait, hold on. I've skipped ahead. Oh my god. I was getting too excited to kind of come to the end to talk about it overall. What Luke does is he begins to bond with Annabeth the moment they meet. And what he does is offer Annabeth the dagger that Hal gave him. Basically saying, I can tell that you're a wise person, and only the swiftest and wisest can control and use a knife, because I don't remember his words, but basically it's like she's a wise badass. You know, she's going to be able to use a knife. Knives are the best weapon for someone who's swift and stealthy, and he thinks that's going to be for Annabeth. And she's like honoured to be able to have this and be gifted this. And yeah, it's just that's all that I missed, which was an important bit because I mentioned it earlier, but I completely forgot to mention it this time around because I'm a big dum-dum. But as we get to the end bit where Luke is on guard and he's writing in his diary, he's writing this story, and he's reading through all Hal's past, and understanding what needs to happen here. And these are his words. I promise, Hal, I will learn from your mistakes. If the gods ever treat me that badly, I will fight back. Now, that technically isn't the last bit, because he's thinking about that whilst being with Annabeth, but that idea carries on, and as he's writing in that diary, he's going to make a difference. He's going to change. He's not going to let himself be walked over by the gods. And considering what he turns into in Percy Jackson and who he becomes and how he changes, it's no wonder that that was the thing that he took away from Hal's, the experience of being with Hal, and the experience of seeing Annabeth so young and so scared that his image of the gods is tainted forever. And he knows that he's just going to have to survive day to day until they can find safety. But he's going to, so he can protect Thalia and Annabeth. And it's just such a poignant moment and a poignant part of his story, and it fills in so many other blanks about him. And I'm really looking forward to getting onto the main bits of the story to see how his narrative here and how he as a character changes over these next few years, from what does happen with him and Thalia, what happens with him and Annabeth, and even understanding a little bit more about Annabeth in this case as well, as she is one of the big characters in the original story. But seeing Luke in this light, and again, obviously, spoilers, Luke is the villain in our story. With seeing where he started, seeing what led to him becoming this person, and seeing that narrative, and understanding him as a character, seeing him outside of the villain scope, and seeing what led to him being that person and becoming that person, I think is incredibly important, and so well done in the Diary of Luke Castellan, because we're seeing this different side of him. Firstly, we're actually seeing something from his perspective. Before, in Percy Jackson, we're just seeing him from Percy's perspective, and Percy is completely biased against Luke. And as we saw with Greek heroes and Greek gods, Percy has a bias, and it can really change your perspective. But that's the case with most people. Like, I will have a different interpretation of a person or a work or a film than someone else, because they have a different opinion of it in general. They have a different experience with it. Like for me, like Korrasami in Legend of Korra, I absolutely adored it. To this day, it makes me cry whenever I watch that episode. I remember the first time seeing it. But for other people, it's not their sort of thing. They didn't see anything with it because they didn't interpret it in that way. It's the same with Luke and our opinion of him. But this story, well done, Uncle Rick. This story kind of pinpoints the initial moment, like the first, what's the word I want to use here? The first mark on moments of Luke's list of, this is too much. And for everything that we learn after, what happens with Thalia, what Hermes does, what Luke experiences, everything like that is just another notch on Luke's list. No, notch isn't what I want to use, because that's used for something else. What is the word I want to use? Oh my goodness. Maybe checkbox? It's just another thing for him to check off of, these are the things that the gods have done against me and my family and us demigods. This is just another thing to tick off against them. And this, I think, was one of the biggest ones. This is what started off his checklist. This experience with Hal and his punishment, and this punishment against other demigods to prove to another demigod that what they did was wrong. Like, there's something about it that just seems wrong in, I know obviously people are dying, of course it's wrong, but Hal's punishment is the definition of why the gods need to change. And from what we get with the Trials of Apollo series, we just see more of that happening. And I am intrigued if we ever get a covering of Hal's story in the Trials of Apollo. I doubt it, because there's only one book left at the time that I'm recording. But it'd be interesting if that does come up in relation to Luke as a person. But yeah, Hal's story is the beginning of the checklist, and everything that comes after this is just another confirmation that Luke needs to fight back against the gods. And like he says, he promises to protect his family, no matter what. And that's how it ends. And it's just so well done. The character that we get from these people, like Thalia as a character in this is really, really interesting. Like, she's so different than from what we know of her in the Percy Jackson and Heroes of Olympus series. She's so much more light-hearted in a way. Like, she's still pretty chill in the Percy Jackson series, but in this, she's so much more optimistic. And I think that's what's really quite sad, is that we actually see this as the first time as well of her having her own checklist of things to no longer be optimistic about. And this is her optimism for a future as a demigod. And then obviously in Annabeth's case, we see the beginning of how her life really started. And this is something that I know that a lot of people talk about, is that no one really understood why Annabeth had such, what her problem was in a lot of the books. Like, she's really defensive about Luke. She's comes across really aggressive about certain things. But seeing this and understanding that she was probably 6 years old when she ran away from home, you kind of understand what that problem, not even that she doesn't have a problem. I may change my mind when we go further into this, but at current, this just shows that she is a traumatized child. And I don't know anything about psychology. I don't know anything about child growth or anything like that. But for a child to go through something like that at such a young age in their development, it's no wonder that her way of seeing things is skewered to a specific perspective. But I will not go further into the science stuff because, firstly, I failed science. Secondly, I don't know what I'm talking about. There is no thirdly. I wanted to do a thirdly, but there is no thirdly because I don't know what I'm talking about. So let's just move on as a whole to the summary of today's episode of The Diary of Luke Castellan. And that is just the amount of foreshadowing and narrative, kind of the beginning of a narrative for our villain and one of our side characters and one of our main characters as well, is truly fascinating. We get the prophecy for Thalia, we see Luke's future, and we see Annabeth's connection to them both, which explains her character in later books. And we see from Luke's perspective the wrath of the gods, and begin to understand where his resentment comes from, where this anger comes from, and the empathy that most probably didn't have originally with Luke as a character in a sense, begins here, which is possibly going to change our perspective of who he is as a character in the later books. But we'll see when we get to those chapters. Now, okay, this is something that it's new to introduce to the show, but I was meant to be doing it from the start, but I forgot that I was meant to be doing it from the start, so this is the first official part of an ending to an episode, which I will hopefully be continuing on from here on out, if I remember. I'm sure I possibly maybe will, but this is a sort of segmenty thing for you guys to get involved, and it is called the question of the episode. Now, each of these questions are going to be related to the particular topic of the episode, of the chapters that we looked at, or the characters that we looked at in particular, and the main theme of that episode. And you guys can answer by sending me a message on our Instagram or our Twitter or on Tumblr, or even emailing us. And obviously, of course, all that information is in the episode notes. But today's question of the episode is: would you say it's important to learn the backstories of characters? And if so, what should a backstory reveal about a character? Now, the examples you can use are from Percy Jackson. They could be from another book series that you enjoy, or even maybe something you're writing yourself. Whatever the case, tell me about pack stories and what you feel is important about them, and anything you guys send me, if you wish me to do so, I will read them out at the end of next week's episode. Like, for example, for me, I think it would be interesting to have the backstories of every character, in a sense. Well, not every character, but characters that have a significance to the story. Like Sally Jackson, for example. I would love to get an idea of who she was before Poseidon, or maybe even in her relationship with Poseidon, or maybe just after her relationship with him, just to kind of get an idea of who she was before all of this happened. Just 'cause I think it'd be really interesting just to see a different side to Sally. But that's just my side. I would enjoy to hear yours. Now, before I sign off, I need to give a few shout outs to some brilliant supporters of this podcast who I am truly thankful and appreciative of, because you guys have been great. First up are the 2 Percy Jackson Instagroup chats I am in. The Damn Weirdos and Slep Now or Die. These guys have been big supporters and cheerleaders for this podcast, and I am eternally grateful for them. And last but definitely not least, Chariton of Aphrodisias, I'm sorry if I've said that wrong, on Tumblr, who actually reviewed my first episode, Percy Jackson and the Greek Gods, on that Tumblr blog, and aim to continue to review my series. Honestly, I was so utterly touched by them doing that, and kind of just honoured that they would want to do something like that, and their analysis and study was just fantastic, and I'll link to their review and any others that have come out since my recording of this in the episode notes also. But yeah, so just to Chariton, thank you so much. To sign off now, I'm sure you guys are grateful for it, I want to thank you all for joining me today for the story of Luke Castellan. Be sure to join me next Wednesday as we begin, finally I'm sure for you guys, with our main dude Percy, in Percy Jackson and the Lightning Thief. Now, to plug where you can find our podcast, because I have also forgotten to do that in the past, we are available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, where you can leave a rating and a review, please and thank you, Stitcher, Deezer and Audio Boom. In the meantime, however, between episodes, you can find the Best Damn Camp on various social media at Best Damn Camp Pod on Instagram and Twitter, and on Tumblr at thebestdamncamp.tumblr.com. If you want to email me with your own thoughts, or you want to chat or anything like that, or you want to get involved in the question of the episode, you can email thebestdamncamp@hotmail.com, and if you want me to, I will read it out at the end of the show. Again, thank you guys for tuning in. As always, I've been Fran, your very own hunter, and I will see/speak to you guys next time. Bye.